Hi everyone, this is Arjun, like Argentina without the Tina, founder and CEO of Wrkbench, which is a visual creative collaboration tool for visual and creative people. Today I have the honor of interviewing Bill Gordon, who is an angel investor, a speaker, and also the founder of his latest startup, which he's going to talk about, 50 Plus Nation. Bill, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us about the role of education in 2016 and for the next few years, but also talking a little bit about history and how education has played a role in entrepreneurial endeavors and in journeys of many other people. So let's get started. Bill, can you talk about a little bit about your background and how you came to be as an angel investor and a successful entrepreneur, at least in my eyes?
Okay. Yeah, well, thanks for having me on today, Arjun. It's funny because my wife I always want to put a U in your name, Arjun, and my wife says, no, he says it Arjun. Go listen. Anyway, so I'm glad you refreshed me on that. She's not sitting here with me.
I'll be happy.
My deep background is actually in science. Ended up with a PhD from Berkeley in cellular and molecular biology.
Mm-hmm.
But I left that field fairly soon after I completed my PhD and the 2 years of postdoctoral work. And so my path to angel investing and entrepreneurship was relatively circuitous. Spent a little bit of time on Wall Street after my PhD, but this was in the very early days of, actually in the days of the Apple II Plus. And so I made some early attempts at beating the market with an Apple II Plus. Got my head handed to me because it's one thing to write a program and it's another thing to have the discipline to follow your program. And it was the latter that got to me. So I eventually went back and did an MBA at the Wharton School and came out, again, connected to Wall Street, but this time on the buy side. And was with a firm named Dimensional Fund Advisors, which in those days was just a couple $1 billion under management. I helped plant a seed of an idea there that today they're at about 400 billion under management. And David Booth, one of the two founders, has his name on the Chicago school, thanks to the growth of that company.
Wow.
I eventually ended up pursuing a fairly large entrepreneurial venture, which ended up it was in the communications sector. I partnered with the guy that had done the first triple play broadband system in the world when he was at US West. And by that time, I was at Alliance Capital. And so originally we put together a partnership between Alliance Capital and US West to try to raise money for their adventures around the world because they were the cowboys of the Bell system, doing things like triple play broadband for the first time in the UK in the late 80s into the early 90s. And it was actually a second iteration of that. I ended up leaving Alliance Capital because spent a couple of years teeing up a project together with US West. And then they, at the last minute, taught me a very, very hard lesson, said, hey, it's nice knowing you, because all the groundwork we had done had gone not to just convince outside investors that we had something interesting, but it convinced their board that they should just do it all themselves. So that was an incredibly hard lesson. But within a couple of years, US West, when the US deregulated telecom, gave up on overseas adventures. And he and I partnered and ended up building a company over the next 5 years where we ended up with 20 million broadband homes in Europe and 4 countries, which was a very interesting experience. That's what gave me the chance to make enough money over a 5-year period to basically eventually come home and start to explore my own entrepreneurial interests in a much smaller scale, and which led to both biotech startup, harkening back to my very earliest days, supporting friends that were ready to start something called Tetragenetics, which is very heavily focused on malaria and some other diseases. And then for me personally, it eventually led to the teaching. At the time that you and I met, I was teaching in New York City. I had spent some time helping Connecticut try to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem, but then before I moved to Portland, spent a couple of years at the School of Visual Arts teaching in the Design for Social Innovation program. And so my focus these days is now heavily on continuing to teach, but now it's about teaching my own generation, the 50+ generation, which I think is in sore need of more entrepreneurial thinking.
So let's dive into your role of your role essentially in education as far as New York City was concerned, because that's really where we met, and we met at the university. And so talk to me about what were some of the trends you were seeing with the students that were coming in, and the needs that they were feeling, or the startup ecosystem, and how that was playing a role in the university itself. Did you feel that a lot of students were trying to leave the university to build their ideas, or was the university in general helping them? What was the role of education in their dreams, essentially, and how were you playing along that?
Well, again, I was the Design for Social Innovation program at the School of Visual Arts was actually a very specialized program in that it was actually not undergraduate, but it was people that had chosen to come back, usually after a few years out, to get a Master's of Fine Arts. And again, I always say it wasn't designing pretty pictures and things you hang on the wall, but it was really systems design, solving social problems. So generally, the 50 students that I had over that 2-year period in 2 different cohorts of 25, each had, some very passionate, drive to try to come up with a way to solve, a problem in the world from their point of view. And so it was all over the map from, I'm going to start something very small. One of my star students actually has a company called Lovability, which is a condom company for women, so that they feel comfortable carrying men's condoms on their person, in their purse, amongst their kit, because it's part of, women's to make sure that you're prepared, even if he's not. So it's just, and so Tiffany Gaines had started that, doing extremely well, really causing a movement. But at the other end of the scale, we had people working for projects, ended up working on projects at the UN, and so everything in between, young startups like Lovability and innovation projects at places like the UN. So
at SVA.
That was at SVA. And at the same time, I was actually spending a lot of time. I was involved in the leadership circle of the New York Tech Meetup, and had my good friend of mine, Andrew Richer, has been the board chair there for a number of years. And I got to know Don Barber, the founder, and a number of other people connected to it. And so I at the time I was teaching, I was always bringing back things I had heard, on the stage at the monthly meetups of the New York Tech Meetup, which I've always found to be an extremely exciting gathering. But in terms of, so I really wasn't exposed at that point to undergraduates. The place where I was exposed more to, I'll call it undergraduates, was in the work I did in Connecticut, running an accelerator program for a couple of years in partnership with the state. And so there I was seeing people, in some cases, that were in college wanting to do things like drop out and start something, or people that were post-college, more in what I would call the general assembly target demographic, that were trying to figure out what to do post their education, because the education really hadn't prepared them to earn a living. So
that's interesting. I mean, if general assembly, I think, is a good example of the Hogwarts, the ecosystem you and I were talking about before, where you have an institution that is fun to go to learn different kinds of skills, and they're not fixated on the norms, the traditional norms, the status quo of previous generations in terms of education.
Right.
At least for me, going through university, going through high school, a lot of it basically meant that a lot of the teachers and the principals, they had a lot of old school mentality. And so when we were trying to learn entrepreneurship, they were teaching us business plans, and they were teaching us, elements of running a business that didn't, not to say that not important, but they weren't relevant in terms of building a startup in New York City in today's ecosystem.
Right.
So they were teaching us business decks. They weren't teaching us how to network with angel investors.
Right.
They were not teaching us, how to do an elevator pitch and those kinds of things. And so I think shout out to Matt Breimer, who's one of the co-founders at General Assembly. I think General Assembly is a good example of that Hogwarts mentality coming into the city. But I do think we need more of that. And you're seeing WeWork do something similar. I mean, they just started, and I'd love to see what you think about this, is the We Live program, where they're actually allowing entrepreneurs to live in the building itself and have that cross-pollination of ideas. What would you say about that, of living and working at the same time? But I mean, basically work-life balance doesn't mean anything anymore.
Right. No, I mean, I hadn't heard of that one. I mean, WeWork just opened here in Portland, and I still keep saying I got to go down there and see what this one's like. My son had worked at the one in Soho in New York for quite a while. But no, I think that's fascinating. It was actually my student, Tiffany, who had found at Lovability that almost moved into a collective that was designed around that principle, but it wasn't WeWork or one of the other bigger groups. And I forget actually what the name was, but it's one that I think has places in both Boston and New York. And so, you know, I think it's a natural extension of where particularly the millennial generation has been and is likely to go, that, you know, let's just put it all together. And I admire that thinking and that experimentation, because to me, that's, at the end of the day, that's what entrepreneurship is. It's just constant experimentation.
Do you feel like millennials would be more open to this kind of things? Because I know you're working on 50 Plus Nation, which is, I'll let you talk about it, but do you feel that the trends are only geared for people in their 20s and early 30s, or could it be for a different kind of mindset which doesn't have an age barrier?
Well, again, that's the exact thing that's really a conundrum for me as I try to do 50 Plus Nation, because in my first class, which actually is going to start tomorrow.
Congratulations.
You know, and it's, you know, like I say, the average, I think I told you earlier, the average age in this class actually is 46, because I tried to push it down and say, I don't want to make this a 50 plus age ghetto where we don't have anybody younger, because I have a series of role models I'm going to introduce you to, you know, saying to this average age of 46 group. And they all happen to be either millennial or relatively young Gen X. It turns out, you know, at the end of this year, there'll be 2 years of Gen X over 50, because, you know, we all keep moving through time. But it's really the younger Gen X and the millennials that are all the role models that I have for doing online business, because that's really what I'm focusing on, is teaching people in this age group to take years of experience where they've built up knowledge, talent, skills, and a little bit of wisdom, and apply that to their own needs. Because what I see, and this is the issue I'm hitting on for the 50 plus, is the good news is we're all going to live a lot longer than we ever thought. The bad news is almost none of us have a financial plan that aligns with that longevity. So we're really going to have to apply something, and my vote is it's got to be entrepreneurial thinking, because all entrepreneurship is just a form of problem solving. It's not a genetic trait, you know, either we got it or we don't. We can all learn to think more entrepreneurially and solve problems that way. And that the problem so many of us are going to have is running out of assets before we die.
So how do you think you can teach more people to think more entrepreneurially? It's definitely a skill set that makes you question and be in tune with the amount of resources you have, the amount of capital you have, the amount of time you have. But there are still financial advisors. There are still people out there who get paid a lot of money to think on your behalf on how to think entrepreneurially. But what are some tips that you would give to the audience in terms of thinking like that?
Well, again, you got to remember, this is really about solopreneurship. And I think even in a more broad sense, I think, you know, if you look at what Babson College does, because they're the college that is really pure entrepreneurship. And from day one there at Babson, it's about, you know, come up with an idea. We're going to give you a little bit of money. You go out and you start making some money so you can pay back that money we gave you. That's part of the grade. And it's part of the test.
That's brilliant.
You know, and so the whole notion of solopreneurship, I think a lot more people should try something on their own before they say, well, I'm going to gather a bunch of friends, and then we're not going to have enough money, so we're going to have to get somebody else's money. Because my whole point to the 50 plus generation is you've got all this experience. And in this connected world, you can find a way to package that experience and knowledge and put it out to up to 4 billion people. And if it's sufficiently well packaged, you're going to make money. You're not going to be the next Sergey or Larry or Bill or, in terms of hitting it out of the park, but you're going to cover, you have an ability through this means to cover the costs, to cover the shortfall that you're likely to have. And that's a whole different problem set. But so then I don't want to discourage people, because I say at the beginning, at the outset, you probably shouldn't risk your nest egg. This is coming out of a chapter of, the $100 Startup, which a guy named Chris Guillebeau here in Portland wrote back in 2012. And I used that as a reference in my class at SVA. I said, a lot of you want to scale something, and that's all good.
Can you repeat I'm going to make a list here of resources. Can you repeat the name of the author and the book again?
Yeah, Guillebeau is his last name, Guillebeau.
One second. I'm just going to write the title first. The title is $100
Startup.
$100 Startup.
The $100 Startup.
And then by
Chris, Guillebeau.
Beau.
Yeah.
Oh, it's French.
Yeah, French. And he lives here in Portland. He just got back last night from a 6-week, 30-city book tour of his newest book, which is called Born for This.
Okay.
And you put $100 Startup together with Born for This, and it answers a lot of questions, because Born for This, it takes the view, if you haven't found what you're born to do, whatever age you are, if you happen to be 60 or 70 and you still haven't found it, keep looking. But his strongest suggestion is, whatever age you are, if you happen to have an income stream, great. Get a second income stream. At least be dabbling on the side with some kind of a side hustle.
Yeah.
Is the new term.
Yep, side hustle.
And make sure that you got a way to feed yourself. If the first one, the first stream quits. And that's really what I'm saying to the 50+ generation now is, you got to solve your own problem, and it can be done. I mean, it's interesting because in one of the blogs I was writing in lead up to launching 50+ Nation, I was looking at Kauffman Foundation.
Brilliant.
And they're the foundation of entrepreneurship. And in their vision statement, they say, we want to support a society of economically independent individuals who are engaged citizens contributing to the improvement of their communities. And so that doesn't really say the word entrepreneurship. But then they go on in the 2015 report, because they do this annual report every year. And last year, they said, well, there's this boom in entrepreneurial activity amongst older people, but it's really, and then this is in quotes, necessity entrepreneurship. And they say, and that doesn't count in our numbers. So the kind of thing I'm trying to teach 50+ people, they say, well, that's not entrepreneurship. That doesn't count. You're just trying to fill your own needs. And it's like, well, what else is new?
Wait, so how does a foundation like Kauffman or any other entrepreneurial foundation, how does that actually come down and help entrepreneurial or entrepreneurs or people who are looking to get into the space, in the startup space? How does it actually help them? Can you explain the role of a foundation like Kauffman and the whole ecosystem?
Well, I mean, again, they believe they're trying to elevate entrepreneurship, but when they talk about entrepreneurship, and the fact is, if you comb through their site, they never actually give a definition of entrepreneurship.
So
you look at the Babson College site, and they give a couple different ones, and then they challenge the rest of the world to give their own, and then they compile them. But Kauffman, for the most, and I don't mean to criticize them too hard. It just stood out to me when I got into this issue of, how to help the 50+ generation, and saying, let's talk about how you can create your own income streams. Kauffman is more about, in my view, at the higher level, talking to economic development people in different jurisdictions. Like when I was working with the people in Connecticut, they would love to have a conversation with Kauffman, and Kauffman could teach them how to plant more Facebook or Google or Tumblr or whatever seeds in their ground So that lo and behold, they'd wake up one morning and there'd be, 2, 3, 500, a couple thousand new jobs caused by one effort, as opposed to spending some money on educating a broader population about what entrepreneurial thinking is to solve their own problems.
So it's more.
And that's what caught me off guard was when Kaufman says, "Oh, and that's called necessity entrepreneurship."
Right.
That doesn't show up in our numbers.
They're mainly focused on helping ecosystems like at city scale and state scale
Right.
become hubs for entrepreneurs, versus the universities themselves. They have a responsibility to a few thousand students, and they're concerned about getting them on. They're more hands-on than a foundation would ever be, because just given the scale.
Right, but you stand back and you look at New York and the role that the New York Tech Meetup in particular has played. It had its 10th anniversary last year, and there's almost nothing that goes on in the startup, particularly the tech sector, that Dawn and her colleagues on the board of the New York Tech Meetup don't have their hands in, and don't get calls from the city and the state all the time. Because they can call, a governor or a mayor and get them to show up on that stage in a heartbeat, because they are very important. And so you have, the example of New York, and you have the example of Silicon Valley, and everybody wants, even New York early on wanted to be, the new Silicon Valley, so they called it Silicon Alley. But every one of these ecosystems has got to take on its own personality that's particular to the conditions that are there, and that's where, the neighboring state of Connecticut, when I was trying to help them, their first inclination was, well, take me to the New York Tech Meetup. Let's go steal a few of those companies and bring them back across the border. And I would, my answer was, no, just act like you're the 6th or 7th, whatever borough it is of New York, and, collaborate with them, because, and there were some unique features of Connecticut. The unfortunate part was that I saw the worst that can happen, which is now being corrected. But for a couple, we started an ecosystem in Connecticut, got $25 million worth of funding from the governor, $5 million a year to run experiments, which is what you should do. And after the first year, and that was the year in which Andy Moss and I ran our accelerator called Lean Launch Ventures together, we and the people at the state learned a lot. But there was another faction that was against the principal faction that had got that money, that said, we want all the money, we shouldn't be running these experiments. Let's just go back to the status quo and forget about this stuff. And that's really why I ended up in New York City. I was like, oh my God, you're kidding me. It was a food fight over $25 million, over $5 million a year, which is, chump change in the overall scheme of things. And that's too often what happens. It's either I'm going to try to create exactly another New York or another Silicon Valley here, or I'm going to get some money and experiment, and then we're just going to fight over how the money gets used. And it's a very narrow path, to doing it right, and to find the ways that it should be done that fit the character and the personality of that community. I mean, so somebody like Boulder, Colorado has done a very good job. It had Brad, what's Brad's last name? Brad Feld, and some people like that gave it very careful guidance and care, to make it what it is, which is a very robust system of its own, not another Silicon Valley, nor a Silicon Alley, or, New York.
So I have here, as in terms of thinking entrepreneurially, I mean, you gave a great example of Babson College itself, where you come in, first day, you're told, here's a little bit of capital to go out and build a company or build an idea which can generate revenue for yourself. And you can be able to pay tuition back, essentially, which is very unique, actually. I've never heard of any university, or even like a landlord, if you certain milestones that you can actually redeem rewards, and that incentivizes you to do better, which is a very unique mindset, which is, I think, new and can be applied to not only education, but real estate and many other use cases. And obviously, when we're talking about scale, New York Tech Meetup, or any meetup in any city, whether it's Portland or Boulder or San Francisco, I think the meetups and the universities, who are the centers of research and experimentation and education, they have a responsibility to help the local people, the local startups, become more entrepreneurial, or become more resourceful with their resources available. But when it comes to the foundations and the bigger foundations of the government, essentially, their role in the ecosystem, their role as far as education is concerned, entrepreneurship, is just to enable the little players, the smaller local players, to do what they do best. Would that be a correct assessment?
Yeah, no, I think that's well said, actually.
So moving on to good examples. So I mean, New York Tech Meetup is a great example of, Babson College is another, great example of organizations figuring out education and their role in the ecosystem very well. But what about institutions like Singularity University, which we just recently talked about before the call, or before the Fireside webinar chat? And what do you think about Singularity University? It's for older people. It's for continuing education. But what do you think about that as far as their role in the ecosystem?
Well, I think it's a really interesting model. I was aware of it when it started, but when I asked you what questions you might ask me, and you said I might ask for your opinion on Singularity, I had to go back to it, and so I spent about a half hour last night really combing through what they're up to these days, and what I realized is it doesn't hit. I read a lot. I read a lot about startups and about technology and about bioscience and other, aspects of science and technology. But they have very rarely popped up on my radar screen in the reading I've been doing in the last few years. I mean, I can't tell you the last time I was at the website reading about something that was going on there. But when I stand back and I look at what they're saying and some of what's going on there, I say that's a really amazing model. And yet, you'd also asked me a question about Harvard, and I want to say the same thing about both of them in the sense that there's always been this sense of eliteness about Harvard. There's clearly a very strong sense of eliteness about Singularity as well. So I look at it and I say, well, the thing that interested me was they say we have 11 grand challenges because almost everything we want to get involved in needs to be good for 1 billion people or more, which is kind of an extension of Silicon Valley, in the broad sense, where they, try to drive companies, Y Combinator. If you're not doing something for 1 billion people, you're not going to make enough money to pay us back at the rates that we need to make to, to stay rich. So, but standing, that aside, the Singularity with the 11 grand challenges, I looked and I said, well, at least I'm touching 2 with my 50 plus nation of their 11 grand challenges. One is learning and one is prosperity. How to learn more, in my case, for the 50 plus generation about how to continue to be prosperous, or if you haven't started being prosperous yet, at least start being more prosperous late at this point in life. And that's a real challenge. That is a real challenge. They don't believe in any accreditation. They believe in having no accreditation as far as the rules and regulations are concerned that dictate curriculum at universities and whatnot. They basically said, we're not doing it. We're not following any of those rules. We're creating our own curriculum, making it more fun and more, intuitive, more engaging for people to learn from. Do you feel that if more and more university and more centers of education will go, rogue essentially and not follow the traditional norms, does that set us up for failure, or does that actually make us more innovative that we're actually not following the traditional norms? Well, just yesterday, I went and had coffee with a friend that I've developed here in the last year and a half in Portland, who runs one of the entrepreneurial centers at one of the universities here in town. And this question has come up a few times in the last few days, but it was front and center with him because I was talking about the class that I'm about to launch, and I'm launching it through, an independent website, 50 plus nation. And I have been taking some of my own classes, leading up to this from some other people that are basically also teaching through their own websites. And just to give you an example, and these are the kinds of role models I'm going to throw out to the people in the class that I'm about to start teaching tomorrow. I've been taking a class from a 36-year-old woman here in Portland who I've never met. She only lives 2 miles away, but it's all been through Facebook and other means of more, electronic-based communication. And she's been building up to a class that I took from her for a couple of years. But she's got 125 students from all over the world, and they're paying $1,000 a piece for basically a 1-month course. And that's what I was putting down in front of my friend who runs an entrepreneurship program at a university. And his jaw hit the table when he started to think about the tuition that people were paying. And it's not to a university, it's not to any named or any accredited thing. It's to a person that has built a reputation through the crowd. Her name is Jenna Sword, and her site is called YouCanBrand. YouCanBrand.com. And she had been teaching branding, but the course I took from her was actually a course on how to launch your own course in a month. And I, in spite of all my background and experience, I said, I built some very big things. What we did in Europe, 20 million subscriber homes in the broadband space. But here I am as an individual trying to get something launched on the web, and I said, I need some tracks to run on to get to the finish line here. And you have exactly what I need to help me do that. I could have gone and looked through a bunch of university catalogs, and I doubt, for their online courses, and I doubt I would have found that help.
So you're saying that because Singularity University is building a reputation of churning out innovative entrepreneurs and startups and becoming really well known in the ecosystem, that they're able to charge for that and validate their position in the ecosystem, and that it also validates that the education that they're providing is actually helpful, and if not better than their competitors who are accredited and are following traditional norms. They're actually, because they have a reputation, they can do the things that they are doing in terms of innovating and providing that innovation to the ecosystem. Right.
Well, the one that really hit my friend yesterday the hardest, so I gave him the example of Jenna and her YouCanBrand and, making $125,000 over a 4-week period. She'd done a lot of work to build up to that, but now that she's got it, she can repeat it. I was using 2 other examples, both of whom I heard about through Chris Gillibo, the $100 startup guy. One is called Marie. Her name is Marie. She's based in New York. Forleo, Forleo. She runs a program once a year called B School. It's all about building online businesses, and it doesn't have to be solo, but it probably tends to be solo people. But even the solo people, you realize, do create other jobs. They hire virtual assistants and other kinds of help along the way. But her program is priced at $2,000 a head, and it's runs for 8 weeks. It's probably just finished her 8-week run. And in the core group, and that she has, I think there's a number of different groups. There's 3,500 students. So that's $7 million of revenue, unless I misplaced at 0.
Give or take.
And my suspicion is that the 3,500 are actually the core group that's under her, because she allows some of her graduates to build their own groups that are like study groups in the B School program. And so the 3,500 probably doesn't include them. And it turns out the affiliates are getting a very healthy affiliate fee for putting together their own study groups. So again, there's another player, I think also based out of New York, Ramit, R-A-M-I-T, Sethi, S-E-T-H-I, who's basically I'll call her male counterpart, doing almost the same thing under a different brand. I don't remember the name of his brand off the top of my head, but similar structure, a couple $1,000, a few thousand people running through it. In his case, I'm not sure he's once a year or not, but I know she is. But that's the one that made the head of an entrepreneurship program at the university's jaw really hit the table, because those are big numbers. And none of that, like you say, is accredited. But in Marie's case, I think it's at least her 6th or 7th year, and probably close to the same for Ramit.
Wow.
And so that's just a completely different form of education that, again, it's coming through the crowd. The crowd is, and they're all using testimonials and there's some really scammy stuff where people use testimonials that I'm sure are made up. but these are not actually.
I just want to,
these are real people.
I was gonna say, I just want to remind
Yeah.
our viewers that if you want to continue the conversation online as well, you can tweet at us with Wrkbench chats, and I'll be able to see your questions or any comments you have while Bill is talking. Bill, please continue.
No, that's it. I mean, again, so the question that my friend was asking, what is going to happen to the universities? I said, well, I'm curious to call one of I'll call it the School of Visual Arts of Portland, is Pacific PNC, Pacific Northwest College of the Arts. And they were starting to do through one of their departments, I'll call it. It was actually sort of a support function in the school, a series of online courses last year. And I really wanted to compare, because I knew that they were starting out, charging $149, I think was what the price tag was, and to see how that was going for them in comparison to some of these independents that I'm now seeing and getting a better understanding of what they're doing. For some reason, it's going to be a handful of universities that can probably charge the amount of money that some of these independents are charging, and probably more if they want to. But I think the average, I'll call it the more average schools, and there's lots of them, are going to have a harder time in that marketplace competing.
It's interesting. Once you can build that reputation, like you said, many of the people you mentioned and the organizations that they run, once you can do that, you can charge more because people feel that you're more validated than many of the other institutions that have been out there for decades or even centuries. And it's just it must be the way they're engaging with their students is higher, it's better. It's more high touch, and I think what the students are getting out of it is more so than what they can achieve at a university. And I bet there's some sort of referral in terms of word of mouth marketing going on, where that one per student comes in and probably refers 5 other people to him or her as far as a coach is concerned or teacher is concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, and so that's where I've been, trying to stand back and say, where is all this going? Particularly now that I'm putting a toe in the water of, in the past, only having done in-person teaching, but again, doing it to a different demographic now than I had in the past. But there, it feels like there's something disruptive, but I'm not sure who, the winners and the losers, or those that are, hit hardest by the disruption are.
So what do you feel, what makes you feel that, so we talked about Hogwarts, and this could be a joke or it could be funny, but there's a tone of seriousness to it. The thing that we grew up with was Harry Potter, and we had that vision of a school that we all wanted to go to learn, and it was a school of our dreams essentially. And obviously one of my 10-year goals is to build a Hogwarts for kids in art, tech, and entrepreneurship, upstate New York, and invest in their companies that would come out of that, and be able to pay for their tuition. Why I want to do that is because I just feel education and entrepreneurship go hand in hand, but education is falling so far behind, at least in 2016. What is your opinion on Hogwarts? And on a serious tone, what makes it that dream that I bet someone at Singularity University wants to build it into Hogwarts as well? What does it make? What makes it so compelling?
Well, when I read all those books to my kids, I wanted the magic. You
want the magic, yeah.
So I still want the magic. And anyway, there's actually somebody trying to do their own Hogwarts here in Portland called the Wayfinding Academy.
Interesting.
Because if you stand back and look at some of the kinds of courses I've been talking about, there's one piece of that that's very different than what universities are doing. And that is, it's almost like it's designer courses. Because my course right now is actually, I'm not charging for it, but I've signed up 40 students, and this is the purest of lean, the lean method and lean thinking. I want them to be in the class to give me feedback on what they like and don't like, so that I can improve it to the point where the next group that takes it is actually going to get, the refined product.
Just to go back on the example, you said Mayfair or Wayfair?
Wayfinding.
A wayfinding, like W-A-Y finding.
Yeah, academy. And it's just about to open some doors here, but their whole thing is in a standard unit, historically in a university or college, they offer you sort of pre-boxed majors, pre-boxed curriculum.
Interesting.
In some you can do something that's self-guided. It's not all completely out of a box, but most of what you do is out of the box. And so what the Wayfinding Academy is starting out saying, no more of that. It's all going to be custom tailored to the individual, whatever that means. And so I can't give you all the details, but it's not about sitting in classrooms and going through curricula that have been used before. It's all about
so it's not prepackaged learning. It's actually customized to the students' needs.
Yeah, and so they're starting with a class of 25 or 30, in their first class, and still trying to figure out, is it a replacement for a 4-year program, or is it a new kind of 2-year gap initiative that then goes on to something else? But I think their preference is, and their assumption is that in those first couple of years, you won't say, therefore, now I'm going to go, to one of the other guys and do it the old-fashioned way. You're going to keep on continuing, to educate yourself in large measure, because so much of this today is really about, continued, lifelong learning, and recognizing that, at 22 or 21, whenever you get out of the college, then, it's onto the workforce, and, that's the old way. I mean, to me, it's just all about continued learning constantly, because it's all right here at your fingertips.
Right.
I think the biggest challenge for most of these alternative efforts is getting that social element, because clearly, when my kids went to college, the social dynamic of living in a dormitory. So it goes back to that question you asked much earlier about WeWork, doing.
Or even Hogwarts, if you remember the common rooms and whatnot.
What's that? Say that again.
I'm saying even Hogwarts, if you remember the many examples of kids hanging out in the Gryffindor common room, or hanging out and living and working and learning together. I think that sense of community is something that we take away from fairy tales, but it's also WeWork is now trying to build at We Live.
Right. So again, I mean, I'm all for alternatives. I mean, my wife is the one that we were having this conversation, anticipation of me talking to you, and she was saying, what about knowledge for knowledge's sake?
Interesting.
That she wants to make the counter argument that everything shouldn't be about, how you're going to make, create a job for yourself or make a living. There's got to be some stuff that's just to stimulate your brain. So what are you going to do with those studies in literature, and, language, and, I'd let her speak for herself on the subject she has in mind. But it's a logical challenge to say, is everything going to be turned into basically a jobs training program of some form or another? There's got to be somewhere along the line where you just, learn to think for thinking's sake, pick up some knowledge that is not going to, have any meaningful probability of making you money, but it's going to expand, your capabilities and your capacity, which, when you come to things that are going to make you money, or hopefully can make you money, or that other stuff is still going to help. Again, that's so I think now with the classes that I've been involved in, almost every one of them has some kind of a social tool connected to it, generally a private Facebook group, where you spend time getting to know people and diving in pretty deep to help people from other parts of the world that, are having this problem or that problem. So it becomes kind of a, a group effort to make sure that, the majority of people are making it through.
Do you think any of this actually has a role, an important role in developing people outside our normal ecosystem? And when I'm specifically talking about third world countries and places around the world where you see so many things happening, and I'm a firm believer in that education and having the right resources and also education at the same time, not one or the other, that if people became more entrepreneurial and they felt that they could actually become something more than what they have, or they are currently. I mean, if you think about the Middle East, or if you think about, South America, or if you think about even other places, I believe that they would make better decisions, more positive creation-based decisions than the opposite, if they actually knew that they could take a dollar, invest it in themselves, or in their currency, in their respective currencies, and then they could get something out of it 5x if they worked hard enough and they put their brains to work in a positive way. How does your work and any of the other education institutions or organizations, how do they take that, whether it's online or in person, to those people and make sure that we're actually creating together and not just half the world is creating?
Well, the guy you should take a look at is Paul Polak, P-O-L-A-K.
I'm going to write this down. So Paul,
yeah, Polak, P-O-L-A-K.
P-O-L-A-K? Okay.
A-K, yeah.
One L.
Yeah, one L.
A-K, okay.
A-K, that's a C.
Yeah.
There you go. He wrote a book called Out of Poverty.
Okay.
He started out in my 50-plus age group. He's now in his 70s, but he started out in his 50-plus age group, that many years ago in Denver. He was a psychiatrist, and he was frustrated with his practice, saying, what can I do to have more of an impact? And so he started out by wanting to check out people in the homeless population in Denver. And he ended up, and it's a really interesting video. It's Paul interviewing a homeless guy sitting in basically a very large cardboard box, which was this guy's shelter, talking to him about his needs. So this is a homeless person in America. We'll get to overseas here in a minute, but and he began to ask the guy what it was that he needed, and his answer was, I need a place, just a small place, where I can keep my most valuable possessions when I can't be here. I can't. It's hard for me to leave him sitting in his box near an abandoned loading dock at a warehouse. And as they talked, it became, well, what if there were some airport-like lockers in places where you could actually, for a small amount of money, put your stuff over the course of a day and then come back and get it. And it turned out that was an entrepreneurial business that he helped that guy start, because they'd had this conversation in a cardboard box, which was this guy's, homeless home, we'll call it. Paul went on from there to say, that was really interesting. Who can I really impact at scale? And that's where he took his sort of line of questioning and thinking, to countries around the world where the average income was $1 a day, and began to sit with those people and say, what is it that you need? And one of the first things he came up with was in discussions with people, I forget which country, it was either, I think it was it might have been in Asia, it might have been in Africa, but he's now gone on and touched a lot of different countries around the world with this same thinking. It turned out what so many $1-a-day farmers needed was just a way to drill down about 20 feet, maybe 30 feet, and to get to some additional water supplies and have the equipment that they needed to pull that water up so that they could grow a second crop on whatever their small plot was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, and in some cases, 3 crops a year, because they could get to the water source. And what it became was him helping them envision what a foot pump would look like that could pull that water up. So it wasn't about doing something expensive. It was just working with what was available to those people in that place, that they could come up with a solution that would allow them to pull water up from 25 feet under the ground and distribute it in their very small plot of land so that they could feed their family better and hopefully have a few leftovers that they could sell to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And that story, his Out of Poverty story, you can find him on Facebook, you can find the book. It's an amazing story. He has now, by his own estimation, brought 50 to 75 million people out of poverty as judged against their own scale, living conditions in that country. So if you're $1 a day farmer and poverty's is $4 a day, he has taken people to $5 a day. And that counts, because that's the measure there, not here.
So you're saying that he took a conventional idea, which he found here at home, and then he applied it to the needs of people in third world countries. And that's really the mindset that you need. Is you need to solve a problem in a current market situation, then you need to take the entrepreneurial mindset and take it to somewhere else. But you have to be careful, in my opinion. And
no. I know where you're going, because it's the unintended consequences.
Right. You can't be a cookie cutter. You can't be cookie cutting everything, all the solutions.
Right. So that's why it was really their solution. It was, he got out of them what they needed, and they talked about it. And that's where they came up with, if one member, at least an hour a day, one member of the family could, spend their time on, we'll call it the Stairmaster-like pump.
Huh.
That'll bring the family out of poverty. That'll bring enough water up to get enough crops that will eat better and potentially make some additional money. And that's where, again, it was not, I'm going to find a way to make shoes and ship them there. All of the stuff that came out of his ideas are made there. By local people. So it actually created industry there. And that's where he's always been first and foremost about, not having unintended consequences. Let me see, get more designers who historically have been designing for the 10% to design for the other 90%. But do it by talking to the people, understanding their needs, and letting them be an active participant in creating the solution to their own need.
So what I'm getting from this is that you have an idea, you have an initial idea, and if you're willing to take it to another market, another place, in this case, a third world country where poverty is an issue, you have to have that mindset, entrepreneurial idea, but be willing to adapt to the local needs itself. Be willing to do focus groups. Be willing to talk to the people themselves, and not just do a cookie cutter.
And don't necessarily come there with an idea. Go actually talk and listen to people's needs. And that's, when I go back to this beta test course, it's really saying to people, here's my idea of a first module. What do you think? Is that filling your need right now? Is it helping you, for me to show you some role models in the online business world that you can relate to? So I mean, again, that's, entrepreneurship at the end of the day is really about validating an idea. And the only way you're going to do that is by talking to a potential customer. So in Paul's case, he was basically saying, I don't know what your problems are. Let's talk. Like with the guy in the box. He had no idea that it was, I need a set of airport lockers somewhere here, near my, where I have my box. Yeah. But in the end, they found the place to put it, and somehow it came together, and there was a business hatched where not only did this guy get to keep his stuff, but he got to make a lot of money off of other people's boxes.
Let's talk about the role of mentors and people in the entrepreneurial, in getting people up and running, and making sure that knowledge transfer, which I think is the most important thing for any mentor to provide as far as the service is concerned, the knowledge transfer is important. So this article that I dragged in from US News, it talks about parents and their role of educating their kids early on and setting that tone very early on, and that relationship can set the tone for policymakers to make better rules, and provide better laws essentially around education itself, as far as the parent-kid relationship is concerned, or the teacher-kid relationship is concerned. What is your role? What is your thinking behind the role of mentors, and whether it's parents or it's teachers or even people like yourself? I mean, I consider you a mentor personally, but what do you think that ecosystem, and how can we make it better overall?
Well, and again, this is two-way, because sitting here doing this, I consider you one of my role models too, we'll call it.
Oh gosh, thank you. I'm sending a hug across as an attachment for an email.
And that's part of my point with this 50+ stuff. I don't want this age ghetto. I want people to interact across the generations. And so again, in the case of kids, I think any kind of mentorship, is incredibly valuable. And that not every kid finds somebody that they can turn to. And it should start with the parents, and often does start with the parents. But it helps to take it beyond, so that there's a whole layer of emotion and feeling that goes with expectations from a parent to a kid, where somebody that's beyond that circle doesn't bring necessarily all that potential baggage with them. So again, I'm all for parents being as involved as humanly possible. My boys now are 23 and 24 years old, and we're very happy with the way they've turned out. They're each doing their own thing, and at times I have tried to direct them to others beyond myself and my wife that they can tap into, to get other perspectives. And they continue to do that through various forms of continuing education they're involved in. But no, I think mentorship and role models are incredibly important, really at all phases of life. And again, that's why I'm really big on and starting out this class saying I'm going to start introducing you to a series of people that I've been following for the last 3 years now. And again, I mean, watching you go from not Canva, it was Canvas without the A. Was that what it was?
Yeah, without the A.
Not the art program. To Wrkbench without whatever letters missing in Wrkbench.
Just the O.
Just the O. That's why I still keep getting confused on that. But anyway, it's been fascinating to watch, because I mean, even these fireside chats, I mean, to watch you start this, I mean, it's like, very cool. Why not? I just
want to give a shout out to a friend of mine, Kelly Ward, who says she's watching our webinar right now, and she loves you personally, and she thanks you for talking about one of her favorite books by Paul, and so shout out to Kelly on that.
Cool, very cool. Yeah, and I was a board member at something called PopTech. It's still around. I was from about 2008 to 2012, and we did the first an early social innovation fellows program, and that's why Paul was a mentor to some of the people in that program, because the PopTech stuff is social innovation all around the world. And actually, the first project was an HIV project in South Africa called Project Masaluleke. Oh, I can't even remember how to spell that, but it's on the PopTech site, poptech.org. And it's a TED-like gathering that's always been in Camden, Maine. It's in its 20-something year. TED's in its 30-something year. And so it was a really interesting organization to be connected with. And that's what really got me into thinking about social entrepreneurship. It was actually a fellow board member that started the program at School of Visual Arts, because she looked around one day and said, there's no place to get a graduate degree in anything to do with social innovation. So she went to the owner of. It's a privately owned school, a school of visual arts, and said, how about if I could set up this program and design for social innovation and give a master's of fine arts in it? And I was like, cool. So it was actually Pop Tech and more recently that extension of Pop Tech, that got me to SVA. That, it's all about your network. I mean, I encourage my kids to just network whenever possible, and if you end up with a mentor out of that networking, great. And if nothing else, you'll end up with some kindred spirits that are more equals that can help you too. So.
No, I agree. The people make businesses, people make relationships.
Yeah.
So I think that's the most important thing. Is I think if anything, taking away from this webinar, the Fireside webinar with the real fireplace, is that the role of education and entrepreneurship is important, ever changing. But the people who run it, who are taking away from it, I think they're the most important players overall. Whether it's on the receiving end or the teaching end, or the IP transfer or the knowledge transfer end, however you want to term it. I think people at the end of the day do matter the most.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about people and how to connect, and with all these ways we have to connect, there's no reason not to be doing it. And hopefully a lot of it leads to analog connections, not just always digital connections, because
right.
The world are very important to go see and look somebody in the eye.
Although I was gonna say, although using Wrkbench and visualizing what we're saying it could be interesting.
No, absolutely. No, this is amazing. This is a really cool tool. It's fun to sit here and watch you doing this.
Thank you. All right, Bill, thank you so much for being on the show. Any last pieces of advice you'd give to our audience before we sign off?
Just think entrepreneurially. It's a God-given gift. It's not it's not genetic. We all have it. Just use it.
Yeah, you could learn it. You could, and then once you learn it and you become successful, make sure you share it with other people. The most important thing is passing it down.
Yeah.
Horizontally to other colleagues and peers as well, I think.
So where is that fireplace actually? Is that just a video?
No, it's a LED fireplace with a heater built into it. So.
Oh, that's right. Now I remember. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. My whole thing is creating ecosystems or centers of conversation which are cozy and warm. I've talked about this in the past few shows. We do this because A, we want to stand out, and B, we want to create an environment where you and I would feel warm and cozy and talking about having intellectual conversations as we would in a living room, right? If you think about the founding fathers, they went to each other's houses and they just sat by the fire and they talked about how to build the U.S. as a country, or how to do different things and make innovations happen.
Yeah.
So I love fireplaces, plants, lights.
Yeah, I'm big on them too.
I'm sorry?
I say I'm big on them too. I like them.
Yeah. So, well, anyway, thank you again, Bill Gordon, for being on the show. Again, Bill Gordon is the founder of 50 Plus Nation, former professor at SVA, and also a very successful as angel investor, if I can say that.
Yeah.
But thank you.
They didn't all work. If they did, you'd be lying. So anybody that says they all work, nah.
Yeah. All right, Bill. Thank you so much. Enjoy your day, and we'll be in touch. Bye.
All right. See you, Arjun. Thanks a lot, man.